Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk Assassin's Creed, your number one podcast for all things Assassin's Creed. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at what if the game was to visit feudal Japan. And in this episode, we're basically just going to take a look at what time period they could choose, how they could approach the game, and most importantly, how could they handle cultural kindness, essentially. In each game, they've got to be appreciative of all culture, especially Viking, Egyptian, and so on. So, quite a bit to talk about. But we are not alone in this episode. We are joined by a good friend, Andrew, from Visions of the Past.
Hello, Declan. How are you today?
I am good, and I'm suddenly out of breath from running to get a glass of water.
Oh, we all do that every now and again.
It's the joys of having asthma. I'll make a terrible assassin. On top of the rooster in here, like, I'm ready. So, biggest question I want to put forward before we jump into the history is, feudal Japan is one of the biggest marketing questions of Assassin's Creed. And we know that they said Egypt would be too boring, but they did it anyway. Could this approach be hinting that Japan isn't off the table?
Well, they hinted with Japanese architecture all the way back to Black Flag. So I don't think that we're ever going to say that this one location and time period is going to be off the table. I mean, if you say that, then you're going to eventually run out of quote unquote popular time periods, and you're going to either start reusing periods or you're going to go into places that people wouldn't know of or wouldn't think would make an interesting story. I think it's one of the reasons why, for instance, we got the Great Recoinage of 1695 in an audiobook. It's not very popular. Why make a game about it?
It's a very good point. But do you feel that because feudal Japan is so recommended from the community, that the game could hit a point where some people are not going to enjoy it because it's not what they expected, because they built a certain unrealistic hype?
I think you're going to get that with any location you set. I think we saw that with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I think we even saw that with Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I think any of these popular places that are essentially giving you the opportunity to do quote unquote historical tourism is going to set high expectations for people that are um, into those time periods and histories. You set yourself up not necessarily for failure, but you always have the opportunity to upset somebody. Just putting something out there has the opportunity to upset somebody.
I really don't think there's ever been a time frame that I've been overhyped for. When it said Vikings, I just wanted to play Assassin's Creed. I'm simple. I just
True. I mean, there hasn't been anything that I've been disappointed with from a historical standpoint. Every one of the series has made me go, wait, is this person true? And then go and look more into it. But there hasn't been anything from a story standpoint where I've said, yeah, that's disappointing. Or at least historically, from the time period. There might be places within the story where I would think that, but not something that stems directly from the time period.
So, leading on nicely from time period is, where could we expect Assassin's Creed to go? Now, we know that a very popular Japanese-based game, Ghost of Tsushima, is set during the first Mongol invasion of 1274. So, we do know that there is a lot of heritage and lore in the game, and we have discussed in private, me and you, about 1582 during the Battle of Yamazaki.
Well, I think, oh goodness, I think it was back before Origins released, probably right around the time Unity released. I think there was a survey that went out from Ubisoft that said basically, what time period would you like to see? And that time period, the Sengoku period, was on that list. So I think it's most likely, if we will get a Japanese setting, it will be set somewhere within that that time period, that 1562 to That's not right. The 1467 to 1615 time period. That 150 or so set of years.
On one of the time periods from what we've discussed is 1582, where Akechi Mitsusaide assassinates Odoga Nobunaga, and I sincerely apologize that I'm not very good at pronunciation. I do have dyslexia, so I'm apologizing if I've caused any offense by mispronunciations. But the reason why I'm picking this out is just generally with the assassinates certain person, that would tie in with how Assassin's Creed works. You just generally assassinate someone.
Well, not just that. I mean, you mentioned Oda no, I think it's Nobunaga. I think probably not, knowing my luck. But not only is he already shown in the lore, which we can probably talk about a little bit. I don't know in depth everything about him, but I know he's been mentioned before. But he's considered one of the great unifiers of Japan. If we're going to set anywhere in that time period, I would think it would be logical to have him show.
So if he's already been talked about in Assassin's Creed Memories, was it you were discussing?
Yes, it was It was in Memories.
So if he is the great unifier, then as you write, that would be a great theme for the story, unification, because unification is technically a sub theme of order versus freedom. You've got to unify through order or unify through freedom. So that central theme could play well against a character that is unifying Japan, and even if it's somebody as big as this character who's already mentioned in Assassin's Creed Memories, it would be a smart move to focus on his life or his character for a game.
And even if you don't like focus directly on him, you can do something like that was done with King Alfred in Valhalla and build a story where he's in it sometimes, out of it sometimes. He's on the fringes doing his thing, but not necessarily a big punch in the face impact like Rodrigo Borgia was in Assassin's Creed 2.
So, if in theory he is this central theme, and it was set between the 1580 and 1582, which was 1580 was the end of the Ishima Hujangaji War, and 1282 was when he was assassinated. You could, in that 2 year time period, create a story where the assassins are trying to create a rebel uprising against him, and maybe you play as Akechi, or you play as the same Brotherhood where Akechi is in it, that Akechi's from, that could lead up to that pivotal moment of the story. That's the final climax of the story, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You could follow a samurai through a war, or you can, oh goodness, you could do a personal story where somebody's floating between the different wars, because this is a period of the warring states essentially. Or you could just do none of that and build the assassin, so to speak, get back to what the series used to be from an assassin point of view. There's so many different ways you could take the historical story that it's hard to even speculate.
I mean, I just noticed this in the notes, but one cool little twist they could do is I didn't realize this, but Akechi is the one who assassinates Adaba Nobunaga, but Akechi himself was defeated at the Battle of Yamakasai by Hashiba. So maybe Hashiba Hideyoshi was a samurai in the late Sengoku period, so maybe you could play as that person. You know, Akechi was a Templar who destroyed Adoba for the unification, and at the end of the game is you defeating Akechi. Could be a cool little story.
There's tons of stories within there because of all of the political intrigue at the time, and if you follow the lore from from Memories, Nobunaga, I'm probably going to say it 3 different more times, but he held a Sword of Eden. So there's a reason there that you could want to figure out what's going on with him. Like there's I don't know how much of a truth there is to this, but they used to say there was a rumor or something about the development of Unity where you would follow the Sword of Eden that Arno eventually gets through the ages. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we have that prologue. What if you follow this Sword of Eden through the ages? Just seeing different time periods within Japan.
That could work. Another possibility I was thinking, if it was to tie in with Valhalla, was because we don't know what Basim saw with the reader, that maybe there is a hint to one of the sons coming back as a sage during that time period. And that's the reason why he visits it, to try and find his son that was taken from him by Odin.
Right. I mean, they, if I remember right, they make a comment that Odin traveled across the world looking for ways to resurrect his son that Loki killed. There's it very easily could take that story and say that Odin took any one of Loki's kids, because I'm under the impression that all three of Loki's kids with I'm drawing the blank of the giant in the mythology, but who basically is Alethea, that they could take all three of those kids, Hel, Jormungandr, the world serpent, and Fenrir or Fenris, however lore it is that we take that one for truth, and take them to Japan, and they could easily tie into any of the myths of ancient Japan and build that around the quote-unquote Japanese clan of Isu.
That could work. I think that one, and I know that fantasy and mythology is a touchy subject with Assassin's Creed lately, because a lot of fans are saying Assassin's Creed is losing its identity by touching mythology, but it is hard to argue that Isu's science is mythological to people that don't know about science at the time.
Exactly. A couple weeks ago, I put out a podcast on religion in Assassin's Creed, and that what it really boils down to is all religions in one form or another stem from the Isu. So you have to look at it one way or another. I mean, if you have someone very heavily religious in, say, ancient Japan, knowingly or unknowingly, they are either following Isu, or they are following someone who found an Isu artifact. So it's, even if you don't like that aspect of the story, there's a reason for it being there.
I think another important part of the next game, if they do visit Japan, is Assassins and Templars being in the game. They've been missing from the game for ages, and by looking at the Sengoku period, this is a time where assassins are formed, because we know in Assassin's Creed Chronicles, which is set in 1526, Xiao Jian is trained by the assassins of the Chinese Brotherhood. So there is a possible that branch could have moved over to Japan before Japan closed its borders to the world.
Absolutely. The year that you had mentioned, you said 1582, right?
Assassin's Creed Chronicles 1526.
No, I was talking about for what you were thinking within the settings, because
Yeah.
and I mentioned that because within Assassin's Creed Memories, there is a dated assassin by the name of Yamuchi Taka, who was born in 1562. So he'd be right around 20 years old at the point where you were thinking for the story, and he lives until 1639. So they very easily could follow a group of assassins within this time period. And they mention within Memories that Hattori Hanzo, I guess now in the Western side, maybe not necessarily in Japan, known more for creating blades in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill. So there's historically assassins there already. The question becomes, how do you do the Templars? Do you follow them from the Templars that we see in the other games, or are they a cult on their own, like the cult of Cosmos or the Order of the Ancients?
I've been thinking, as I look over my notes more, it is a possibility that they could be a cult. Not a cult, I mean, coming from what we're seeing now. The reason being is in 1614, Catholicism is officially banned and all missionaries are ordered to leave the country. So, in theory, we could state that in 1614, the assassins won and were managed to push out the Templars from Japan for good.
Because they were using the Christianity, the cross, as a yeah, that would make sense
So,
from a lore historical standpoint.
and you could see from a law point of view that the Order of Ancients, the Cult of Cosmos, and the one in Valhalla, which I think is still the Order of Ancients, all
Yep.
failed because they were trying to integrate into that society. But when King Alfred, and this is a spoiler, created the poor soldier of Christ and created a more unified Father of understanding under one God, that's when Christianity, the Templar agents, become stronger. And I know it sounds daft, but the Templars seem to have operated stronger under one banner instead of trying to adapt into different civilizations. So having them come to Japan under the one banner of we're Templars, this is our ideology, our father understanding, trying to influence Japan and take over their own culture could create a great story of freedom through control. You're trying to give Japan its freedom to enjoy its culture, enjoy its life, where the Templars are trying to become a bit more order, and it fails. And by 1614, they're all banished, and Japan becomes the first official freedom without order.
Yeah, I could see the story kind of going something like that. It's one of those things to where there's just so much potential, I think, that no matter what we say, part of it'll be right, part of it'll be wrong. It's just a matter of how they choose to write it. There's so much history from both true world history and lore that they could take for this game and put it together. Not to mention the mythological side that is, I don't necessarily say it's complex, but I was confused by it. And so there are different ways. Like we could see, just kind of throwing it out there. We have the project Anthropes, basically the creation of the humans, and they have their own um, creation myths and how that could tie into the project that seems to be building out a little bit more after seeing Valhalla and having it introduced in Odyssey. It seems that if there's a little nugget here and a nugget there that are painting a bigger picture.
And we did talk about last week creation, not last week, the week before, creation and destruction, how them type myths can fit into Eastern lore because the Mesopotamian myths that we found did, like they say, gods under a bigger god created humans. They didn't like them, world ended, but they kept a few alive. That's essentially what happened in the Toba catastrophe. Humans survived and carried on because humans are like cockroaches. We just keep going on.
Yeah, that's how they were built. I mean, they built humans to survive, to do hard labor, and they built Neanderthals to be warriors. So it's just a matter of how they want to mold, I guess, their creation myths and look at those myths through the Isu prism.
So, I think the last topic we'll quickly touch on is cultural appreciation. Now, this is one that I would never really branch that much, but after seeing the success of Ghost of Tsushima and how they were honoured by Tsushima because of how they appreciate the culture, and we know Assassin's Creed has appreciated the culture through their always mornings of when they do those warnings to start the game, how it's built by a team of various faiths and religions. We've got to understand that with certain cultures, you can't just be very heavy-handed with microtransactions because something like that could be seen as bias to their country. So a big shiny purpley rainbow samurai armor might be seen as offensive to the cultural heritage of samurais.
It could be. I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about Japanese culture, but the way at least what I understand is that um, it's not necessarily capitalism. Well, of course, there's buying and selling, but And if I'm wrong, I'm sure someone will tell me. But I just kind of feel like if you force microtractions in a Japanese game like you did in Valhalla, which has more suits of armor for sale than you can find in the game, that could cause an issue. Now, I'm not saying that it will, because Ubisoft has two Japanese studios, one based in Tokyo and one based in Osaka. But it could be. But I do see them taking the necessarily quote unquote precautions. One thing I do want to mention that I think would go a long way with the culture and basically from the world. Even if you don't do the standard Assassin's Creed Assassin Templar story, you absolutely have to touch on the Onimushas, the Japanese female warriors of the time. You can't have a story like this in this time period without touching on those women. That came out wrong. Without discussing those women.
I do agree. So it's kind of one of those things, if they want to choose this time period, they can't just do whatever they want. They have to try and touch upon the culture, and if in this time period, they can't ignore historical people like that. They'll have to touch upon it, which would make real great sense for the story and could work as a full female character, which is something that the series needs, and it would be a very fair way of doing it because it's being very appreciative of the culture it's set in, but it's also being very accurate about the history. As long as they don't pull a stunt of just let's switch if you want to switch, because that's unfair.
I also think it's unfair. Let's just assume that every Assassin's Creed is going to have that choice, that male-female choice that we've had for the last two games. You can't do what Valhalla did and market it solely on the male lead, the male part of the character, and then say, by the way, he's not the canon gender. It's the female character that's canon. Sorry, he's actually somebody else. So you can't do that anymore. After even though Valhalla made a lot of money, I don't think you can do that anymore from a cultural standpoint throughout the world. I mean, the eyes on the product have changed.
I think the other thing that you can't really do, because I class it as cashing in on choice, which is unfair, is Odyssey's viewpoint, where you pick anybody you want, but then you have to go buy a £10 book to know that Cassandra is the female choice and her story is in a book.
Right. You can't do that either. But I will admit, it's nice to see that Valhalla gave you that option of saying, well, here's what is canon based on letting the Animus decide. Change it if you want, but here's what's canon. The problem I had with Valhalla, and you have to figure out what you do with choice. Do you go all the way to the Odyssey side where choices didn't really look like they made a difference, but they did? Or do you go to Valhalla where the choices don't matter at all because you're always going to end up doing the same thing under the illusion? So you got to find that happy medium, I think.
Happy medium, if they visit the Japan period, then it'd be a perfect time to single female leads with I can't pronounce what they're called.
Yeah, now you're gonna have me do it.
I'm dyslexic. This is bad.
Well, I can't pronounce half the thing myself. Onimusha.
You'd have to have them as a single lead. That's very nice
absolutely,
to
because
do.
their story is going to be much different than if you used a male samurai. Absolutely, because they would be going through different hardships, and I think if you're going to base the story, you have to give those hardships.
But they could also do, and I know this is a different game, but it is fair. If they bring choice, you could use it through Skyrim type mechanics where the choices don't affect the story, but they're for information. So you can go get your target down the road, but if you want to know why you're getting your target or more filler on the target, you keep making different choices in conversation.
Yeah, that's kind of what Valhalla did, even though it all ended up in the same place anyway.
I think that's the only way Choice is. I think Choice is always nice, and the way they're handling the exploration, where you could, I think it was Odyssey, where it gave you a basic location, but you had to scout for the information.
Yeah.
That could be a great way for the choice. So you know your target is in Castle X, but if you do all the choices, you can get a bit more information. So it kind of makes this whole little playable dynamic where the choices don't matter, no, but if you know that this character can be alone at this certain time, just how Origins had life moments where some characters would come day and night, you can then plan how you play. So he sits by a campfire at night, so it's a better stealth opportunity. I'll go do it
Yeah,
that
and
way.
I think Ghost of Tsushima did that too.
I haven't played Ghost of Tsushima. I need to.
Yeah, me too, but I'd have to buy PlayStation for that. But yeah, there's just, we could sit here and we could speculate all day on gameplay mechanics like that, or if they bring back um, the Eagle connection like with Icaros, or if they just do straight Eagle Vision or what they would call it. We could sit here all day and speculate on that. It just, I think we're far enough out from this game based on some of the reports, leaks, and secrets that we've been hearing that we might not see this game for 4 or 5 years, maybe.
Yes, I did hear that with the COVID pandemic, all productions for the next big AC may not drop till 2023.
Yeah, that's what I thought I saw. And then
But
that might be another Third Crusade game, but that's a whole nother bucket of worms.
Third Crusade is Assassin's Creed 1 remaster. I'm calling it. I discussed this in last week's episode.
I was gonna say, I think you've been saying that for a while.
Just last thing I'll say on it, because I did do a big podcast last week on Crusade and Rumors. Um, Assassin's Creed 1 has Secret Crusade, Assassin's Creed 1, Assassin's Creed Bloodlines, all set in the Third Crusade. Why go back to the Third Crusade with a new character and a new story that could contradict what happened in Altair's life? It's just
I
too messy.
I think the only way that you do that, because I saw that it was based around King Richard, and you do that either before or after the Third Crusade. That's it. That's the only way, in my opinion, that you can do that without uh, retroactively changing the continuity from it, the first Assassin's Creed.
But one of the rumors says you play as a knight under King Richard and you meet Altair and Maria. But
I didn't see that. Well, as long as you do it after September 1191, that wouldn't necessarily change the lore.
you see where it gets tricky because you actually meet King Richard as Altair and you challenge him about one of his knights being an assassin or a Templar. I'm trying to
So
remember Assassin's Creed 1.
the way that rumor sounds like is that would be changing the ending to Assassin's Creed, because that's exactly word for word how he hunts down Robert.
Yeah, so you're playing a knight under King Richard, but the knights under King Richard you would challenge at the end of AC1 to be a Templar. So playing as a knight under King Richard during the Third Crusade where you meet Altair and Maria is confusing, which is why I say it's a remaster collection because it's being done by Sophia, and Sophia did ports of Prince of Persia. I'm going to call it all day long.
Sophia also did Rogue.
See, they know how to handle AC games.
If I remember right, they did Rogue, and I think they did one other game. Were they the ones who did Liberation?
Yes. Because it's why I say in my last week's thing that they did Liberation, so they know the mechanics behind a handheld game. So if they were going to help remaster Bloodlines, they already have the knowledge because of Liberation. Boom, I'm calling it.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Ubisoft, hire me.
Time will tell. I doubt we'll see anything from Assassin's Creed in their upcoming Ubi Forward event, unless it's about Siege of Paris.
Ooh, Siege of Paris.
Because that would be the only thing that they'd have coming remote, because we have Druids. I'm drawing a blank. Wrath of the Druids. In a couple weeks, and then sometime in the summer we have the Siege of Paris. Now, the only other thing they could do, they could tie into this rumored DLC codenamed Meteor. I personally think that might be Discovery Tour. They haven't announced a release date for that yet. They could announce a second season pass for Valhalla, but that's a whole, again, I mean, we're getting into speculation on things that are
not related.
Not related, yeah. I mean,
well, what is related is there is a Japanese Assassin's Creed game, mobile game from Tencent in the works.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one.
So maybe me and you here speculating about Japan going next. Maybe they're just going to chicken out and give us a cheap mobile gacha game, or worse, because I have bought it and I wish I could get my money back. Assassin's Creed Identity. Not a fun Assassin's Creed open world, but we do know open world mobile games like Genshin Impact has proven are popular now, so we don't really know how it could work.
All right. Well,
speculation.
I mean, the history's there, the lore's there. They could do it. And I think they could do it well based on what we've seen with Valhalla.
I agree. They can put a lot of faith and tension in, and I think if COVID is impacting until later 2023, that gives them more time to develop and be kinder to the culture and less likely to have a ton of bugs at launch.
Absolutely. They need more time. They can't just rush a game out. We have things bugged that were bugs since the drop of Valhalla in November. It's a little ridiculous, if you ask me. It shouldn't have happened, but I'm not going to say that COVID didn't have an effect on that. It clearly did.
So sadly, this is all we do have time for tonight, but I think it's fair to say that Japan can't be withdrawn from the table because there's a lot of time period they can explore, and there's a lot of stuff they can do to be cultural, appreciative, and be very kind towards. So how we see it is anyone's guess. Will Japan be novelization only? Will Japan be in a very small Tencent mobile game? Or will we finally see a strong Japan lead as a main title game? It's speculation at this point, but with rumours flying, it's nice to start our own little speculation podcast.
I'm actually glad you mentioned that. Isn't one of the new French novels set in around this period?
I don't know too much, but Fragments is mentioned to be part of this time period, yes.
So, I mean, we're talking about doing this as a full-scale game in this time period. There is a very good chance that they break the time period up and put it throughout Transmedia.
Please don't do that, Ubisoft. I'm broke. I can't afford Transmedia. Unless my local library's giving it out for free, I'm broke.
We might not even see that new novel for a while. It's only been announced in French right now.
I think the final book is in 2022, so I'm guessing translations won't be till 2023.
Well, it depends. We got 2 of that trilogy coming this year and 1 early next year. They could do like they did the comics, which I think was a 6-month translation, but I'm not 100% sure. I mean, worst case scenario, I read everything on it from Access the Animus.
That's what I do. I'm too broke for books.
Well, they catch things I miss too.
That is true. I missed a lot from Valhalla. Tune into their YouTube videos. I'm like, oh, damn, I did not notice that.
Yep.
So, thank you all for tuning in this week. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on visiting Japan. You can get in touch with me on Twitter at ACLetsTalk or my email, assassinscreedletstalk@gmail. If you want to be on this episode or you have ideas, please shoot me a message on email or Twitter. And if you want to if you want to help the show, there is a link to my Ko-fi page in description. And I'll also have a link to Andrew's Twitter so you can spy on Visions of the Past and catch up on all his latest episodes. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.